The scent of roasting game and polished beeswax hung heavy in the air, a familiar perfume of privilege and plenty. Alara moved through the grand hall with a silent grace, a serving tray balanced perfectly on her fingertips. Her simple, homespun dress vanished against the rich tapestries depicting ancient victories of the Thorn clan. Each step on the cold flagstones sent a shiver through her thin shoes, a constant reminder of her place. Her eyes, the color of deep forest moss, were trained on the flickering torchlight, careful not to meet anyone's gaze directly. Yet a silent, internal compass always drew her attention to one specific seat at the high table. Lord Kalen Thorne, the clan heir, sat there, his dark hair falling over his forehead as he conversed with a stern-faced nobleman. He looked every bit the powerful lord he was destined to become, his fine tunic a stark contrast to her humble attire. A knot of longing and fear tightened in Alara's chest. She approached his section of the table, her heart beginning a frantic flutter against her ribs. The clatter of silver against porcelain seemed deafening in her ears. She focused on the steam rising from the roasted pheasant, on the glistening gravy, on the perfect placement of the side dishes. Her fingers, despite their trembling, remained steady as she offered him the platter. Kalen's hand paused, hovering over the meat. For a fraction of a second, his piercing blue eyes, usually so guarded in public, met hers. It was a glance quick as lightning, a secret shared without a single word. In that fleeting moment, Alara felt a warmth spread through her, chasing away the hall's chill. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, meant only for her. Then just as quickly, his gaze shifted back to his plate, his expression composed once more. She moved away, the heat of his gaze lingering on her skin like a brand. Her breath caught in her throat. She understood the unspoken message. Later. The promise of their clandestine meeting fueled her through the remaining hours of her duties. The hall buzzed with laughter and conversation, but to Alara it was all a distant hum, secondary to the quiet thrill that now sang in her veins. She cleared plates, refilled wine goblets, and listened to the boisterous tales of hunting and politics, her mind already racing ahead. The clock in the main tower chimed 10 times, its deep resonance vibrating through the thick stone walls. Alara had long since finished her chores, her hands scrubbed clean, her simple cloak clutched tightly around her. She slipped through a narrow, shadowed passage reserved for servants, her footsteps barely a whisper. The air grew colder, smelling of damp earth and forgotten corners. She passed the sleeping quarters of the guards, their snores rumbling faintly behind heavy doors. Every creak of the old keep, every rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified. Reaching a small, rarely used postern gate, she found it unlatched, just as Kalen had promised. A rush of cool, fresh night air greeted her, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and nervous excitement. She stepped outside, her eyes searching the moonlit grounds. The keep, a formidable silhouette against the starlit sky, felt like a cage she had temporarily escaped. She followed a winding, overgrown path, one known only to the servants and to Kalen, who had discovered it during his adventurous youth. The branches of ancient oak trees formed a tunnel over her head, their leaves rustling softly like hushed whispers. The path descended into the deeper woods, away from the distant glow of the keep's lights. The sounds of human activity faded, replaced by the chorus of crickets and the gentle hoot of an owl. Her fingers brushed against the rough bark of a familiar tree, its trunk thick with age and moss. This was the entrance to their sanctuary, the Whispering Glade. A faint silver light filtered through the dense canopy of leaves, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Alara's breath hitched as she saw him. Kalen stood by the babbling brook, his back to her, his noble bearing softened by the solitude. He wore a simple dark tunic, devoid of any clan insignia, making him look less like a lord and more like a man. The moonlight caught the silver threads in his dark hair. He turned at the sound of her approach, a slow, tender smile spreading across his face. "Alara," he breathed, his voice a low, warm murmur that sent shivers down her spine. The sound was like a melody she had memorized, each note a balm to her soul. She rushed into his arms, burying her face in the soft fabric of his tunic. The scent of him, clean and earthy, filled her senses, a stark contrast to the stuffy, formal air of the keep. His arms wrapped around her, strong and protective, and she felt herself relax against him, all her fears momentarily dissolving into the night. His touch was a silent language, speaking of comfort and belonging, a promise whispered against her hair. "I feared you wouldn't come," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. A tiny sob caught in her throat, a release of the tension she had carried all day. He pulled back slightly, his hands gently framing her face. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones. His eyes, in the dim light, were pools of deep affection, reflecting the starlight above. "Never, I would move mountains to be here with you." His gaze was intense, unwavering, making her feel like the most precious thing in his world. They walked hand in hand to their usual spot, a patch of soft moss beside the gently murmuring brook. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the sweet fragrance of wild honeysuckle and damp earth. The sound of the water flowing over smooth stones was their constant companion, a natural melody that seemed to hush the entire world around them. Here, among the ancient oak trees, they were simply Kaelin and Alara, stripped of titles and expectations. He sat, pulling her down beside him, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into his warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, painting silver streaks across the mossy ground. He picked a tiny wildflower, its petals a delicate shade of blue, and tucked it gently into her braided hair. His touch was feather-light, yet it held a profound weight of tenderness. "Alara," he began, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "This life in the keep, it's difficult. The expectations, the burdens of my name. But when I am with you here, all of that melts away." He turned to face her fully, his fingers intertwining with hers. His brow was slightly furrowed, a hint of the heavy world he carried even here. Her gaze met his, open and trusting. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the weight he spoke of, but also the deep current of emotion that flowed beneath. She squeezed his hand gently, offering silent reassurance. "I know, Kaelin. I understand." But she could not truly understand the full weight of his noble duties, only the love she felt for him. "No, you don't," he corrected gently, his voice thick with emotion. "Not fully, but you make me forget it. You make me remember what it feels like to simply be, to be free, to be loved." He paused, searching her eyes, and she felt her own heart swell with an overwhelming tenderness. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and sudden. "I love you, Alara," he confessed, the words a raw, earnest declaration that echoed in the quiet glade. He had spoken them before, in hushed whispers and tender embraces, but tonight they felt different, imbued with a new depth. "More than I have words to say, more than my duties, more than my name, more than anything the keep demands of me." Her breath hitched. A single tear escaped, tracing a warm path down her cheek. She reached up, her hand cupping his face, feeling the soft stubble of his jaw against her palm. His skin was warm, vibrant with life. "And I love you, Kaelin," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, thick with emotion. "With all my heart." He leaned in, his lips finding hers in a soft, lingering kiss. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of unspoken promises, of a love that defied the boundaries of their world. Her fingers tangled in his dark hair, pulling him closer, wishing this moment could last forever, wishing they could be utterly lost in this glade. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his tunic, pulling out a small, intricately carved silver locket. It gleamed faintly in the moonlight, cool and smooth against his fingertips. Her eyes widened, a gasp escaping her lips. "This is for you, Alara," he said, his voice imbued with a solemn earnestness that made her heart pound. "A token, a promise." He opened the locket, revealing a miniature hand-painted portrait. It was Kaelin, younger, perhaps 14 or 15, with a wide, unburdened smile and bright, mischievous eyes. He looked so free, so full of youthful dreams. Her own past, the simple life before the keep, seemed to echo in that image. "It's beautiful, Kaelin," she murmured, her fingers tracing the delicate silverwork. One side bore the elegant, stylized crest of the Thorn clan, a thorny rose, sharp and beautiful. The other side, however, held a delicate, stylized oak leaf, a symbol of their secret glade, of their shared moments here. The contrast between the rigid clan emblem and the wild leaf was striking, a silent narrative of their love. He took the locket from her, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt through her arm. He fastened the delicate chain around her neck, the cool silver settling against the warmth of her skin. "The rose is for my family, my duty," he explained, his voice low. "But the oak leaf, that is for us, for here, for our secret." He took her hands again, his gaze unwavering. "I swear to you, Alara, I will find a way for us to be together. I know it seems impossible now with my father's expectations, the clan's future, but I will not abandon you, not ever." His words were a torrent of passion and conviction, pouring from his soul into hers. She believed him. In the quiet solitude of the glade, under the watchful eyes of the ancient oak trees, his promises felt real, tangible, unbreakable. The silver locket, heavy and cool against her chest, was a physical manifestation of his devotion. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a warmth that radiated from the locket, through her skin, and deep into her heart. They lingered in the glade for what felt like hours, speaking in hushed tones, sharing dreams and fears, their bodies pressed close against the cold night air. He told her stories of his childhood, of riding through the forests, of sneaking out to explore the hidden corners of the keep. She shared tales of her simple village life before she came to serve, of picking berries in the fields, of the smell of her mother's baking, each story woven into the tapestry of their shared intimacy. His hand found hers again, his thumb stroking the back of her knuckles. He kissed her forehead, then her eyelids, then her lips, each touch a silent reaffirmation of his words. The world outside, with its rigid rules and unyielding expectations, seemed a million miles away, a distant echo that could not touch the purity of their connection here. Finally, with the first hint of dawn painting the eastern sky a pale gray, Kaelin knew they had to part. He stood, pulling Alara gently to her feet. The thought of leaving him, even for a few hours, felt like a wrenching pain in her chest. She clung to him for one last moment, inhaling the scent of his skin, trying to commit every detail of his embrace to memory. "Go now," he urged softly, his voice tinged with regret. "Be careful. I will find a way to see you soon." He pressed a final, lingering kiss to her lips, a silent plea and a promise all at once. Alara nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She watched him disappear into the shadows of the path, his form blending seamlessly with the dark trees. Then turning, she began her own journey back to the keep, a quiet smile playing on her lips. She clutched the silver locket tightly in her hand, its cool weight a comforting presence against her palm. She felt a blossoming joy, a hope so fragile yet so potent, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon that threatened to shatter her burgeoning happiness. A subtle shift began in Alara's body, a whisper at first, easily dismissed amidst the duties of Thorn Keep. A persistent weariness settled deep within her bones, a heaviness that no amount of sleep seemed to alleviate. The fragrant rose gardens, once a source of quiet delight, now sometimes brought a faint, unsettling nausea to her throat. She would pause, leaning against a cold stone wall, a fleeting dizziness clouding her vision before quickly passing. Her appetite, usually simple and predictable, had become strangely fickle, repelled by the strong scent of roasting meat in the kitchens, yet craving tart apples and plain bread. These small changes, like pebbles dislodged in a quiet stream, began to accumulate, each one adding to a growing, unnameable certainty. She had always been observant, her life as a servant sharpening her senses to every nuance. Now those senses turned inward, charting the unfamiliar landscape of her own body. The warmth she felt when Kaelin's silver locket lay against her skin, usually a comfort, now seemed to throb with a nervous energy, a premonition. One morning while fetching water from the courtyard well, the familiar metallic taste of the well water turned bitter on her tongue, sending a sudden wave of sickness through her. She dropped the heavy wooden bucket, the water splashing over her plain linen skirt, and clutched at the rough stone edge of the well. Her stomach churned violently, threatening to betray her secret to the clear morning air. No, this was not just a passing ailment. This felt different, deeper. A sudden chill ran down her spine, not from the cold water, but from the sudden, stark realization that bloomed in her mind. A child. Kalen's child. The thought arrived with a jolt, a mixture of terror and an overwhelming, unexpected tenderness. Her fingers instinctively pressed against her lower belly, as if to confirm the fragile, invisible life already stirring there. A tiny tremor ran through her core. How could this be? They had been so careful, or so she had believed. But in the stolen moments within the whispering glade, wrapped in Kalen's strong arms, lost in the intoxicating scent of damp earth and his skin, caution had often dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the dizzying rush of questions flooding her mind. What would Kalen say? What would Lord Alaric do? The very air in the keep suddenly felt heavy, pressing down on her. The terror was immediate, stark, and cold. A servant pregnant with the master's child was an unthinkable scandal, a path to ruin. She could almost hear the whispers, feel the scornful glances, imagine the swift, harsh judgment. But beneath this icy layer of fear, a fragile, tender sprout of joy began to push through. It was his child, their child, a part of Kalen, forever entwined with her own being. A warmth spread through her, a fierce protectiveness she had never known before. This tiny, unformed life was a secret, a miracle, a burden, and a precious gift all at once. Her eyes, usually downcast, lifted towards the keep's towering battlements, now seeming less like a home and more like a formidable cage. She knew she had to tell Kalen. He had to know. He would understand. He would protect them. The locket, hidden beneath her simple dress, felt warm against her chest, a tangible promise of his devotion. She would find him, today. She would whisper the news, watch his face, and trust in the love that had blossomed between them. Her hands, usually deft and steady, trembled slightly as she finished her chores that morning, each movement infused with a new, urgent purpose. She sought him first in the training yard, where the clash of steel usually echoed through the morning air. But Kalen was not there, his usual post taken by a lesser knight. The scent of sweat and polished metal hung heavy, but his familiar presence was absent. She tried the library next, a place they sometimes met for a stolen moment of quiet. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the scent of old parchment and leather. A few scholars bent over ancient tomes, their whispers hushed, but Kalen's rich voice was nowhere to be heard. A pang of disappointment, sharp and unexpected, pierced her. Throughout the day, Alara moved through the keep with a new frantic energy, her eyes constantly scanning, her ears straining for the familiar cadence of his footsteps or the sound of his voice. She polished the ornate silver in the dining hall, her gaze darting towards the high table, imagining his reaction. She swept the long corridors, her footsteps light, trying to anticipate his movements. Each missed opportunity felt like a small, cruel twist in her stomach. She saw Lord Alaric Thorne, Kalen's father, walking with a grim, determined expression through a long gallery, his voice low and firm to the advisors around him. A shiver of unease traced its way up Alara's spine. Finally, in the late afternoon, she saw him. Kalen emerged from his father's study, a room known for its weighty discussions and stern pronouncements. He was not alone. Two older, somber-faced lords walked beside him, their voices a low rumble. Kalen's usual relaxed posture was gone, replaced by a stiffness that spoke of heavy burdens. His brow was furrowed, a deep line etched between his dark brows. His handsome features, usually so open and warm when he was with her, were now clouded, almost distant. He nodded politely to his companions, his responses brief, almost clipped. Alara hesitated, hidden in the shadow of a tall tapestry depicting a forgotten battle. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, then sank with a sudden, aching fear. This was not the Kalen she knew, the one who would seek her out with a mischievous smile, the one whose eyes would crinkle at the corners when he saw her. This Kalen seemed encased in a shell of duty, his thoughts far away. She watched as he walked past her hiding place, his eyes focused straight ahead, seeing nothing but the heavy responsibilities that clearly weighed upon him. The familiar scent of him, of sandalwood, and something distinctly Kalen, drifted past her, tantalizingly close, yet impossibly far. She decided to wait for a better moment, a more private one. The news she carried was too precious, too dangerous to be delivered in such a hurried public setting. She needed his full attention, his tenderness, the Kalen who had gifted her the locket and promised his devotion. But the days that followed brought no such moment. Kalen remained elusive, his schedule packed with meetings and duties that seemed to stretch late into the night. He was constantly surrounded by advisors, by other lords, by the constant hum of clan business. She would catch glimpses of him in the dining hall, at the head of the table, his plate often barely touched, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. His laughter, once free and resonant, was now rare, a polite, almost forced sound. He looked thinner, his shoulders a little more stooped than she remembered. The air around him felt charged with a tension she could not quite grasp, a silent pressure that seemed to emanate from Lord Alaric himself. She saw Kalen's hands sometimes go to his temple, as if warding off a headache, or simply lost in deep thought. The easy charm she had fallen for seemed to have been replaced by a weary gravity. One afternoon, she was polishing the same silver Kalen had held in his hand countless times. The cold metal felt slick beneath her cloth, reflecting her own anxious face. Kalen walked through the dining hall, heading towards a side door that led to his private study. He was alone, a rare occurrence. This was her chance. Her heart began to race, a frantic drumbeat in her ears. The smell of beeswax and old wood seemed to sharpen around her. "My Lord Kalen," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the acoustics of the high-ceilinged hall carried it. He paused, his hand on the door handle, and turned slowly. His blue eyes, usually so vibrant, seemed shadowed, almost dull. A polite, almost distant expression settled on his face. "Ilara," he said, his voice softer than when he spoke to his peers, but devoid of the warmth she longed for. "Is something amiss?" Her mouth felt suddenly dry. The words, so carefully rehearsed in her mind, caught in her throat. She looked at his tired eyes, his preoccupied air, the way his hand still rested on the door, clearly eager to be gone. This was not the man from the whispering glade, not the Kalen who had held her close and spoken of a future. This was Lord Kalen Thorn, heir to a powerful clan, burdened by invisible weights. The tender joy she had felt earlier began to recede, replaced by a cold knot of dread. "No, my lord," she managed to stammer, her voice trembling slightly. "Forgive me, I only wished to ask if you required anything further." The lie felt heavy on her tongue, sour and unconvincing even to her own ears. Her fingers locked around the silver goblet she was polishing. She knew if she let go, she'd drop it with a clatter. He offered a brief, strained smile, a mere twitch of his lips that did not reach his eyes. "No, Ilara, not at this moment. Thank you." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, perhaps a hint of past tenderness, perhaps simply weariness. Then with a curt nod, he turned and disappeared through the heavy oak door, the sound of it closing echoing faintly in the vast hall. Ilara stood frozen, the silver goblet still clutched in her hand, its coldness a stark contrast to the burning secret within her. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, a familiar ache beginning behind them. He had been so close, yet he might as well have been a world away. His voice, once a melody to her ears, now sounded merely polite, formal. The warmth that had bloomed in her belly began to feel like a vulnerability, a ticking clock rather than a joyful promise. She had held the truth on the tip of her tongue, but the moment, the connection, the understanding she had desperately needed had simply not been there. It was as if a wall, invisible and yet impenetrable, had slowly risen between them. She felt a hollowness in her chest, a growing realization that the Kalen she knew, the Kalen who had whispered promises under the moonlight, was fading, replaced by this distant, burdened lord. The silver locket pressed against her skin no longer felt like a symbol of unwavering devotion, but rather a bittersweet reminder of something precious that was slowly slipping away. Each day, the distance between them seemed to widen, a chasm forming where a bridge of affection once stood firm. The secret of her growing child began to feel less like a shared joy and more like a solitary burden, a heavy weight pressing down on her spirit. She felt suddenly alone, truly alone within the grand, echoing halls of Thorn Keep. Her fingers drifted instinctively to her belly, a gesture of comfort and fierce, silent promise to the life stirring within. The burning secret of her pregnancy, unshared and unspoken, settled deeper within her. A quiet, desperate fire in the coldness that had begun to surround her. Kaylin was gone behind the closed door, leaving her to grapple with a truth that felt suddenly too vast, too frightening, to bear on her own. She was alone in the cold halls, clutching her belly, the unspoken truth, a searing pain in her heart. A subtle shift began in Alar's body, a whisper at first, easily dismissed amidst the duties of Thorn Keep. A persistent weariness settled deep within her bones, a heaviness that no amount of sleep seemed to alleviate. The fragrant rose gardens, once a source of quiet delight, now sometimes brought a faint, unsettling nausea to her throat. She would pause, leaning against a cold stone wall, a fleeting dizziness clouding her vision before quickly passing. Her appetite, usually simple and predictable, had become strangely fickle, repelled by the strong scent of roasting meat in the kitchens, yet craving tart apples and plain bread. These small changes, like pebbles dislodged in a quiet stream, began to accumulate, each one adding to a growing, unnameable certainty. She had always been observant, her life as a servant, sharpening her senses to every nuance. Now those senses turned inward, charting the unfamiliar landscape of her own body. The warmth she felt when Kaylin's silver locket lay against her skin, usually a comfort, now seemed to throb with a nervous energy, a premonition. One morning while fetching water from the courtyard well, the familiar metallic taste of the well water turned bitter on her tongue, sending a sudden wave of sickness through her. She dropped the heavy wooden bucket, the water splashing over her plain linen skirt, and clutched at the rough stone edge of the well. Her stomach churned violently, threatening to betray her secret to the clear morning air. No, this was not just a passing ailment. This felt different, deeper. A sudden chill ran down her spine, not from the cold water, but from the sudden, stark realization that bloomed in her mind. A child, Kaylin's child. The thought arrived with a jolt, a mixture of terror and an overwhelming, unexpected tenderness. Her fingers instinctively pressed against her lower belly, as if to confirm the fragile, invisible life already stirring there. A tiny tremor ran through her. How could this be? They had been so careful, or so she had believed. But in the stolen moments within the whispering glade, wrapped in Kaylin's strong arms, lost in the intoxicating scent of damp earth and his skin, caution had often dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the dizzying rush of questions flooding her mind. What would Kaylin say? What would Lord Alaric do? The very air in the keep suddenly felt heavy, pressing down on her. The terror was immediate, stark, and cold. A servant pregnant with the master's child was an unthinkable scandal, a path to ruin. She could almost hear the whispers, feel the scornful glances, imagine the swift, harsh judgment. But beneath this icy layer of fear, a fragile, tender sprout of joy began to push through. It was his child, their child, a part of Kaylin forever entwined with her own being. A warmth spread through her, a fierce protectiveness she had never known before. This tiny, unformed life was a secret, a miracle, a burden, and a precious gift, all at once. Her eyes, usually downcast, lifted towards the keep's towering battlements, now seeming less like a home and more like a formidable cage. She knew she had to tell Kaylin. He had to know. He would understand. He would protect them. The locket, hidden beneath her simple dress, felt warm against her chest, a tangible promise of his devotion. She would find him, today. She would whisper the news, watch his face, and trust in the love that had blossomed between them. Her hands, usually deft and steady, trembled slightly as she finished her chores that morning, each movement infused with a new, urgent purpose. She sought him first in the training yard, where the clash of steel usually echoed through the morning air. But Kaylin was not there, his usual post taken by a lesser knight. The scent of sweat and polished metal hung heavy, but his familiar presence was absent. She tried the library next, a place they sometimes met for a stolen moment of quiet. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the scent of old parchment and leather. A few scholars bent over ancient tomeses, their whispers hushed, but Kaylin's rich voice was nowhere to be heard. A pang of disappointment, sharp and unexpected, pierced her. Throughout the day, Alara moved through the keep with a new frantic energy, her eyes constantly scanning, her ears straining for the familiar cadence of his footsteps or the sound of his voice. She polished the ornate silver in the dining hall, her gaze darting towards the high table, imagining his reaction. She swept the long corridors, her footsteps light, trying to anticipate his movements. Each missed opportunity felt like a small, cruel twist in her stomach. She saw Lord Alaric Thorne, Kaelin's father, walking with a grim, determined expression through a long gallery, his voice low and firm to the advisors around him. A shiver of unease traced its way up Alara's spine. Finally, in the late afternoon, she saw him. Kaelin emerged from his father's study, a room known for its weighty discussions and stern pronouncements. He was not alone. Two older, somber-faced lords walked beside him, their voices a low rumble. Kaelin's usual relaxed posture was gone, replaced by a stiffness that spoke of heavy burdens. His brow was furrowed, a deep line etched between his dark brows. His handsome features, usually so open and warm when he was with her, were now clouded, almost distant. He nodded politely to his companions, his responses brief, almost clipped. Alara hesitated, hidden in the shadow of a tall tapestry depicting a forgotten battle. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, then sank with a sudden, aching fear. This was not the Kaelin she knew, the one who would seek her out with a mischievous smile, the one whose eyes would crinkle at the corners when he saw her. This Kaelin seemed encased in a shell of duty, his thoughts far away. She watched as he walked past her hiding place, his eyes focused straight ahead, seeing nothing but the heavy responsibilities that clearly weighed upon him. The familiar scent of him, of sandalwood and something distinctly Kaelin, drifted past her, tantalizingly close, yet impossibly far. She decided to wait for a better moment, a more private one. The news she carried was too precious, too dangerous to be delivered in such a hurried, public setting. She needed his full attention, his tenderness, the Kaelin who had gifted her the locket and promised his devotion. But the days that followed brought no such moment. Kaelin remained elusive, his schedule packed with meetings and duties that seemed to stretch late into the night. He was constantly surrounded by advisors, by other lords, by the constant hum of clan business. She would catch glimpses of him in the dining hall, at the head of the table, his plate often barely touched, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. His laughter, once free and resonant, was now rare, a polite, almost forced sound. He looked thinner, his shoulders a little more stooped than she remembered. The air around him felt charged with a tension she could not quite grasp, a silent pressure that seemed to emanate from Lord Alaric himself. She saw Kaelin's hands sometimes go to his temple, as if warding off a headache, or simply lost in deep thought. The easy charm she had fallen for seemed to have been replaced by a weary gravity. One afternoon she was polishing the same silver Kaelin had held in his hand countless times. The cold metal felt slick beneath her cloth, reflecting her own anxious face. Kaelin walked through the dining hall, heading towards a side door that led to his private study. He was alone, a rare occurrence. This was her chance. Her heart began to race, a frantic drumbeat in her ears. The smell of beeswax and old wood seemed to sharpen around her. "My Lord Kaelin," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the acoustics of the high-ceilinged hall carried it. He paused, his hand on the door handle, and turned slowly. His blue eyes, usually so vibrant, seemed shadowed, almost dull. A polite, almost distant expression settled on his face. "Alara," he said, his voice softer than when he spoke to his peers, but devoid of the warmth she longed for. "Is something amiss?" Her mouth felt suddenly dry. The words so carefully rehearsed in her mind caught in her throat. She looked at his tired eyes, his preoccupied air, the way his hands still rested on the door, clearly eager to be gone. This was not the man from the Whispering Glade, not the Kaelin who had held her close and spoken of a future. This was Lord Kaelin Thorne, heir to a powerful clan, burdened by invisible weights. The tender joy she had felt earlier began to recede, replaced by a cold knot of dread. "No, my lord," she managed to stammer, her voice trembling slightly. "Forgive me, I only wished to ask if you required anything further." The lie felt heavy on her tongue, sour and unconvincing, even to her own ears. Her fingers locked around the silver goblet she was polishing. She knew if she let go, she'd drop it with a clatter. He offered a brief, strained smile, a mere twitch of his lips that did not reach his eyes. No, Alara, not at this moment. Thank you. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Perhaps a hint of past tenderness. Perhaps simply weariness. Then with a curt nod, he turned and disappeared through the heavy oak door, the sound of it closing echoing faintly in the vast hall. Alara stood frozen, the silver goblet still clutched in her hand, its coldness a stark contrast to the burning secret within her. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, a familiar ache beginning behind them. He had been so close, yet he might as well have been a world away. His voice, once a melody to her ears, now sounded merely polite, formal. The warmth that had bloomed in her belly began to feel like a vulnerability, a ticking clock rather than a joyful promise. She had held the truth on the tip of her tongue, but the moment, the connection, the understanding she had desperately needed, had simply not been there. It was as if a wall, invisible and yet impenetrable, had slowly risen between them. She felt a hollowness in her chest, a growing realization that the Kaelin she knew, the Kaelin who had whispered promises under the moonlight, was fading, replaced by this distant, burdened lord. The silver locket, pressed against her skin, no longer felt like a symbol of unwavering devotion, but rather a bittersweet reminder of something precious that was slowly slipping away. Each day, the distance between them seemed to widen, a chasm forming where a bridge of affection once stood firm. The secret of her growing child began to feel less like a shared joy and more like a solitary burden, a heavy weight pressing down on her spirit. She felt suddenly alone, truly alone, within the grand, echoing halls of Thorn Keep. Her fingers drifted instinctively to her belly, a gesture of comfort and fierce, silent promise to the life stirring within. The burning secret of her pregnancy, unshared and unspoken, settled deeper within her, a quiet, desperate fire in the coldness that had begun to surround her. Kaelin was gone, behind the closed door, leaving her to grapple with a truth that felt suddenly too vast, too frightening, to bear on her own. She was alone in the cold halls, clutching her own belly, the unspoken truth a searing pain in her heart. A cold draft snaked through the servants' passages, making the tapestries shiver on the ancient stone walls. Alara felt its chill against her skin, a mirroring of the unease that had settled deep within her bones. The familiar rhythms of Thorn Keep felt distorted, stretched thin by an unspoken tension. Days bled into one another, marked only by Kaelin's increasing distance and the growing weight in Alara's belly. She still carried the secret of their child, a fragile, hopeful ember in the encroaching gloom. One crisp morning, a summons rippled through the keep, not a formal announcement, but a hushed order from Lord Alaric Thorn. Kaelin was to present himself in his father's study. Alara, dusting an ornate candelabra in the main corridor, watched him pass. His stride, usually so confident and fluid, seemed hesitant, his shoulders slightly hunched beneath his fine tunic. A faint scent of the rosewater Kaelin favored drifted past her, a memory of softer times that now felt like a cruel mockery. The heavy oak door to Lord Alaric's study groaned shut, a sound that seemed to seal Kaelin bound in with his fate. Moments later, the silence of the keep shattered. Voices, sharp and resonant, began to rise from behind that formidable door. Lord Alaric's booming tones, accustomed to absolute command, cut through the thick wood, each syllable a hammer blow. Alara flinched, her hand instinctively going to the locket hidden beneath her simple dress. The silver felt cool, a stark contrast to the sudden heat in her cheeks. She imagined the stern lines on Lord Alaric's own face, the unyielding set of his jaw, the hard glint in his eyes that could strip a man of his defiance. Kaelin's replies were harder to discern, muffled by the heavy door, but Alara could still sense the tremor in his voice, the desperate cadence of argument. His words were quick, almost pleading, a stark departure from the calm, assured tones he always used with her in the whispering glade. She imagined his dark hair falling across his brow as he argued, his blue eyes perhaps clouded with frustration or a fear she had never seen before. The air crackled with unspoken conflict, the weight of generations of noble duty pressing down on that one room. The argument raged for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour or two. Alara moved through her chores like a phantom, her ears strained, every fiber of her being tethered to the rising and falling tide of the voices. She polished silver that felt cold and indifferent, folded linen that smelled faintly of lavender, all while her mind painted vivid pictures of the scene within the study. Was Kaylin fighting for her? For them? A flicker of hope, thin and fragile, ignited in her chest, only to be immediately doused by a wave of cold dread. She knew the power of Lord Alaric. His will was iron. Then an abrupt silence fell, more chilling than the noise before it. The sudden absence of sound was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all hope. Alara gripped the cleaning cloth tightly, her knuckles white. She waited, heart hammering against her ribs, for what felt like an endless moment. The scent of old parchment and wood smoke, usually comforting in the keep's quieter corners, now seemed to press in on her, suffocating. Finally, the heavy oak door creaked open. Kaylin emerged, not with the fire of a victor, nor the righteous anger of one wronged. He was pale, startlingly so, his skin stretched taut over his cheekbones. The vibrant blue of his eyes, which Alara had always found so captivating, seemed dulled, almost extinguished. His dark hair, usually impeccably styled, was slightly disheveled, as if he had run a frustrated hand through it countless times. His usual easy cheer, the bright spark that often lit his face when he saw her, was gone, replaced by a heavy cloud of resignation. It was a visible burden, weighing down his very posture. He looked older somehow, years added to his youthful face in the span of a few hours. The elegant tailoring of his tunic, which usually accentuated his strong frame, now seemed to hang loosely, as if he had shrunk within it. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace, his gaze fixed on some distant point that Alara could not discern. He did not see her, though she stood only a few feet away, pressed into the shadows of a recessed archway. She could almost taste the bitterness of his defeat in the air. He passed by, leaving behind not the scent of rosewater, but a faint metallic tang of something akin to fear or despair. Alara felt a tremor run through her, a premonition colder than any draft. The secret she carried, the life blooming inside her, suddenly felt terribly vulnerable, exposed to an unseen danger. The locket pressed against her skin, a constant, heavy reminder of promises that now felt as fragile as spun glass. Over the next few days, Kaylin's transformation became even more pronounced. He moved through the keep like a ghost, his laughter gone, his customary greetings replaced by curt nods or complete silence. He spent long hours in the training yard, the clang of sword on shield echoing relentlessly, a furious rhythm that seemed to speak of an internal battle. But even there, his movements lacked their usual grace, replaced by a raw, almost desperate force. Alara saw him at meals, seated at the high table beside his father. He picked at his food, his appetite vanished, his gaze often drifting towards the grand windows, staring out at the distant, familiar forests that once held their secret glade. She longed to speak to him, to press her hand against his, to ask what had been said in that study, what weight had been placed upon his shoulders. But his withdrawn air, the impenetrable barrier he had erected around himself, kept her at bay. His silence was a wall, and she had no tool to breach it. The servants, always attuned to the undercurrents of the keep, began to whisper. Their voices, usually a gentle hum of daily chatter, now carried a sharper, more urgent tone. It began subtly, a hushed word passed between two scullery maids while polishing silver in the pantry. Then it grew, spreading like wildfire through the kitchens, the laundries, and even the stable yards. Alara, ever watchful, her senses heightened by her secret and her growing anxiety, picked up fragments of these hushed conversations. Lord Alaric's been pushing for it for months, a stout cook muttered to a young kitchen hand stirring a pot of stew with vigorous strokes. The rich aroma of herbs and simmering meat filled the air, but Alara could barely register it. A political alliance, they say, the kitchen hand replied, her voice barely above a breath, to secure the Thornlands. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Political alliance. The words were cold, pragmatic, devoid of any warmth or human emotion. They spoke of duty, of power, of a world entirely separate from the tender promises Kaelin had made to her beneath the ancient oak trees. She remembered his words, spoken with such conviction in the glade. "You are my future, Ilara, my only future." Now, those words felt like a cruel fantasy. The whispers continued to grow, weaving a tapestry of dread around Ilara. She heard the name Vance spoken in reverent, almost fearful tones. Lady Seraphina Vance, the daughter of a powerful ancient clan, known for their sharp minds and even sharper ambitions. The thought of Kaelin, her Kaelin, bound to such a woman twisted something deep inside her. The warmth she had nurtured for so long, the quiet joy of her pregnancy, began to chill, replaced by a creeping terror. One afternoon, as Ilara carried a stack of fresh linens down a narrow, dimly lit corridor, she heard two maids just ahead of her. Their voices, usually light and filled with gossip about minor scandals, were low and conspiratorial. The scent of lavender from the linens mingled with the dusty air of the passage. She slowed her steps, pressing herself against the cold stone wall, her heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm. "Did you hear?" One maid, a young woman named Clara with bright, curious eyes, whispered, her voice barely audible. "Lord Kaelin, it's settled." The other maid, Martha, older and more worldly, nodded grimly. "Aye, the formal announcement will be soon." Lord Alaric wasted no time once the Vance family agreed. Martha's rough, work-worn hands smoothed the apron over her simple dress. Ilara's own hands clenched around the linens, the crisp fabric suddenly feeling like a vice. She knew deep in her gut what was coming. Every strained glance, every hushed word, every cold shoulder from Kaelin, it all coalesced into this one terrible, inevitable truth. The air in the narrow corridor felt suddenly thin, as if all oxygen had been sucked from it. "Lady Seraphina Vance," Clara breathed, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "She's supposed to be formidable and beautiful, they say." Martha scoffed softly. "Beautiful or not, she's powerful, and she'll be Lady Thorne. Imagine." Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. Lady Seraphina Vance. The name, spoken so casually by the maid, struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was the confirmation she had dreaded, the undeniable truth that shattered the last vestiges of her hope. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the Kaelin who had whispered promises of eternal love in the Whispering Glade with the Lord Kaelin, now betrothed to a woman named Seraphina Vance. A chilling premonition snaked down her spine, a cold, undeniable certainty that her world was about to be irrevocably torn apart. The linen bundle slipped from her grasp, tumbling silently to the flagstone floor. A cold dread thrummed through Ilara Meadowlight. Maids whispered of a betrothal to Lady Seraphina Vance. Each word was a shard of ice in her heart. She needed to find Kaelin, to hear it from him, to understand this sudden, terrifying shift. The keep, usually familiar, now pressed down like a cage. She waited until late, until the grand hall dimmed and the household slept. Her feet carried her to the rose garden, where their stolen moments unfolded. The moon cast long shadows. A cool breeze brought the scent of jasmine, now tainted with aurum. Kaelin stood by the fountain, his back to her. His shoulders slumped, burdened. Her breath hitched. The air felt heavy with unspoken truths. She stepped forward, her heart beating a frantic warning. She could not turn back. She needed answers. "Kaelin," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stiffened, then slowly turned. His eyes, usually warm, were shadowed, avoiding her gaze. A raw fear shot through Ilara. This was not the Kaelin she knew, the one who promised her everything. This was a stranger, cloaked in guilt. "Ilara," he said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat, a nervous gesture. The rose scent now felt cloying. She clutched the silver locket beneath her tunic, its cold metal a reminder of promises. "I heard the whispers," she managed, her voice cracking. Her fingers locked around the locket. "About you, about Lady Seraphina Vance." Nausea washed over her. She pressed a hand to her belly, a silent plea to the life growing within her. Kaelin's gaze dropped to the ground. He scuffed his boot against a pebble. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, confirming her worst fears without a word. The cold seeped into her bones. "It is true," he said at last, the words heavy. They hung in the air, a hammer blow. Ilara felt her world tilt, their love crumbling. She swayed, her vision blurring. True, she repeated, a desperate plea. Her mind raced. How could he betray their love? Her chest tightened, breath growing difficult. He looked at her, his eyes full of agonizing conflict. Guilt flickered there. My father, he began, his voice barely audible. He has made the arrangements. For the clan. His words sounded stiff, rehearsed. The clan? Alara asked, her voice rising. How could family prosperity outweigh their shared love, their promises? The moon seemed to mock her. He took a step closer, then hesitated. The familiar scent of him, once comfort, now brought only anguish. Our lands are vulnerable, Alara. The Thorn legacy stands on uncertain ground. Lord Alaric demands this alliance. Lady Seraphina's family holds significant power. His words spilled out, an explanation he hoped would justify the unbearable. These were things that meant nothing to her. Alara's gaze fell to his hands, clenched at his sides. They were the same hands that had cradled her, now rigid, betraying nothing of remembered tenderness. A bitter taste of betrayal filled her mouth. And what of us? She finally asked, the question tearing from her throat. What of your promises? The glade? The locket? Her fingers tightened around the silver, a physical pain. A tremor ran through his. He flinched at her words. His head dropped. I know, he mumbled, his voice thick with self-loathing. I know what I said, what I swore. The words were empty echoes. His tone lacked the fire she expected. You promised me forever, she whispered, her voice unraveling. The memory of his devoted eyes burned. The moon highlighted her desperation against his silence. He lifted his head, his blue eyes clouded with regret. I will make it right, Alara. I will find a way. His hand reached out, then retracted. I will protect you. I will protect what we have. His hesitation spoke volumes, a desperate plea for forgiveness. His words lacked conviction, the fire she once knew. There was only weary resignation, a sense of being trapped by chains stronger than his will. He was a son, beholden to a legacy he seemed too weak to defy. Her shattered heart splintered further. Protect me? She scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. How can you protect me, Kaelin, when you cast me aside for another? The question hung, a devastating accusation. The rose scent mocked her. He moved closer, touching her arm. His touch, once electric, felt distant now. It is not like that, Alara. This marriage is merely a formality, a political necessity. It changes nothing between us. His desperate words tasted like ashes. It changed everything. Alara pulled her arm away, her eyes wide. Pain ached in her chest. A formality? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. To pledge your life, your loyalty, your future to another? To swear vows you once spoke to me? The thought was unbearable agony. He tried to embrace her, pulling her close. His touch was hesitant. She stiffened in his arms, his familiar warmth now alien, a source of sorrow. Her heart beat a drum of despair. A burning heat rose behind her eyes. Please, Alara, he murmured into her hair, his voice choked. Do not make this harder. I will find a way. We will be together. Give me time to appease my father, to secure the clan. His words were vague, laced with uncertainty. No fire, no conviction reassured her trembling heart. He asked her to believe in a phantom. She pulled back, her hands pressing against his chest. Her gaze searched his face for the old Kaelin, the one who would fight for her. She found only profound weariness, a defeated soul. His blue eyes seemed dim, clouded by his father's demands. Time? She asked, a single tear escaping. What time, Kaelin? Until you are married? Until you have children with Lady Seraphina? The thought was a dagger to her heart. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, protecting the secret life. He recoiled slightly, the mention of children striking him. His face paled. He knew the secret she carried, though she had not spoken it. Her unspoken truth hung heavy, a silent accusation. No, he whispered, a desperate denial. It will not come to that. I promise you, Alara, I will protect everything. But conviction was missing. His eyes darted away, unable to hold her gaze. He looked into the rose shadows, seeking escape. The rose scent nauseated her. Alara's heart ached, stealing her breath. She had sought reassurance, a spark of love. Instead, she found a man broken by duty, offering empty words. His presence, once joy, now felt like torment. She looked at him, seeing not the fierce lover, but a frightened boy. Trapped. The Kalen she loved was gone, replaced by this guilt-ridden shadow. The realization settled, cold and absolute. "You cannot," she said, her voice flat, tears flowing silently. She felt a profound emptiness, a void where hopes had blossomed. The fountain's gurgle seemed to mock her. Kalen's gaze returned, filled with a desperate plea for her to understand. He stepped forward, his hand reaching. But Alara knew. His promises were just words, whispered in moonlight, destined to be forgotten. He offered shadows when she needed substance. His hand slipped from her arm, leaving her standing alone in the moonlit garden. Tears streamed down her face as his empty promises echoed in her mind. A chill wind, sharper than usual for the season, swept through the Thornkeep courtyard. It carried the faint scent of distant pine and the distinct, rising clamor of an approaching procession. Alara, polishing a heavy brass sconce near the entrance, felt a sudden tightening in her chest. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly against the cool metal. This was the day. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the arrival of Lady Seraphina Vance. A cavalcade of richly caparisoned horses and stern-faced guards, bearing the Vance clan's distinctive raven banner, soon filled the cobbled square. Servants scurried into formation, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. At the heart of the procession, a grand carriage, its dark wood gleaming with polished silver fittings, came to a slow halt. Alara's eyes, wide and fixed, strained to catch a glimpse. A footman, clad in the Vance colors of deep violet and gray, sprang down to open the carriage door. Then she appeared. Lady Seraphina Vance stepped out, her movements fluid and deliberate, like a dancer entering a grand stage. She was taller than Alara had imagined, her form slender and encased in a gown of dark velvet that seemed to absorb the muted daylight. Her hair, the color of midnight, was drawn back from her face in an intricate style that spoke of wealth and meticulous attention. Alara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Seraphina's features were sharp, refined, and undeniably striking. Her lips, a deep rose, were set in a faint, unreadable curve. But it was her eyes that held Alara captive. They were the color of cold steel, intelligent and utterly devoid of warmth. Seraphina surveyed the assembled household and guards with a calm, assessing gaze, missing nothing. It was the look of a queen surveying her new domain, not a guest arriving at a betrothal. Lord Alaric Thorn, Kalen's father, stepped forward to greet her, his imposing figure momentarily dwarfed by her composed intensity. He offered a stiff bow, a gesture of respect that felt more like a concession. Seraphina inclined her head in return, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Kalen was not yet present. Alara felt a pang of relief, followed by a fresh wave of dread. She knew he could not avoid this moment forever. The servants were quickly ushered back to their duties, but Alara found herself unable to move from her alcove. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within her. She watched as Seraphina was led into the great hall, her presence commanding every glance, every whispered comment. The scent of her perfume, a complex aroma of exotic spices and night-blooming jasmine, lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the familiar wood smoke and beeswax of the keep. Later that afternoon, Alara was assigned to assist in the antechamber, preparing it for a formal reception. Her task was to arrange fresh flowers, their delicate petals a stark counterpoint to the heavy brocaded drapes. Her fingers were clumsy, pricking themselves on rose thorns, her mind elsewhere. She heard the soft rustle of expensive fabrics, the murmur of polite conversation, and then a voice that made her stiffen. It was Seraphina's. "And this is the north wing, Lady Seraphina, with its unparalleled views of the valley." Lord Alaric's voice was smooth, practiced. Alara kept her head bowed, pretending to adjust a vase, but her ears strained. She heard Seraphina's reply, cool and articulate. "Indeed, Lord Thorn, a most strategic position. Then a new voice joined them. Kalen. His voice, usually so rich and warm to Alara's ears, now sounded clipped, formal, almost detached. Lady Seraphina, I trust your journey was not too arduous. Alara's breath hitched. She dared a quick glance through the curtain of flowers. There he was. Kalen stood beside Seraphina, his posture rigid, his handsome face carefully composed. He wore a dark tunic embroidered with the thorn crest, looking every inch the dutiful heir. Yet his blue eyes, usually so expressive, seemed distant, almost vacant. He did not look at Seraphina. He looked past her into some unseen point in the distance. Seraphina, however, looked directly at Kalen, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. The journey was quite agreeable, Lord Kalen. I confess I am eager to see more of your formidable keep. Her words were polite, yet Alara sensed an undercurrent of something else, a subtle claim, a proprietary tone. Lord Alaric cleared his throat. Perhaps a tour of the grounds tomorrow, my dear, after you have had time to rest. As they turned to leave the antechamber, Alara bent lower, burying her face in the scent of the lilies. She felt a prickle on the back of her neck, an instinctive warning. Slowly she lifted her gaze. Seraphina's cold steel eyes were fixed directly on her. It was only for a fleeting moment, a mere breath, but in that instant Alara felt utterly exposed. Seraphina's gaze wasn't curious. It was assessing, calculating, as if she were weighing Alara's worth, or perhaps her threat. A shiver traced its way down Alara's spine. Then Seraphina's eyes flickered away, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, and she moved on, leaving Alara frozen amidst the flowers. Had Seraphina seen something? Did she suspect? Alara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and uncertainty. She felt a cold sweat break out on her brow. This woman was not merely a rival, she was a predator, sensing weakness, identifying targets. The rest of the day passed in a haze of apprehension. Alara performed her duties mechanically, her mind replaying that brief, chilling glance. She heard the distant sounds of dinner preparations, the clinking of silver, the hushed voices of the other servants. She tried to dismiss the moment, to tell herself it was simply Seraphina's nature, her habit of observing everything. But the unsettling feeling persisted, a dark premonition gnawing in her stomach. Later that evening, after the formal dinner had commenced, Alara was tasked with delivering a tray of warmed, spiced wine to Lord Alaric's study. The keep was quieter now, the general hubbub contained within the great hall where the family and their esteemed guests were dining. The scent of roasted meats and fine wines wafted from the hall, a stark reminder of the world she served, but could never truly be a part of. As she walked down a dimly lit corridor, she heard voices from the adjoining gallery. It was Kalen and Seraphina. They were not alone, Lord Alaric's heavy voice interspersed with theirs, but their tones were clearer, less formal than before. Curiosity, sharp and painful, compelled Alara to pause. She pressed herself against a tapestried wall, holding her breath, the tray of wine suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. The Alliance will secure our borders for generations, Kalen, Lord Alaric was saying. His voice held a note of triumph. Kalen's reply was low, almost inaudible. I understand, Father. Then Seraphina spoke, her voice laced with a subtle amusement. Indeed, Lord Kalen, our families share many common interests. A union of two such powerful houses is a formidable prospect. Alara peered around the edge of the tapestry. Kalen stood stiffly, his back to her, facing Seraphina. Seraphina was closer to him, her posture relaxed, confident. Her pan, slender and adorned with gleaming rings, reached out. Alara watched, a burning agony twisting in her gut, as Seraphina's elegant fingers settled lightly, possessively, on Kalen's arm. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but to Alara it was a dagger through her heart. It was a declaration, a silent claim. Kalen did not flinch, did not pull away. He merely stood there, unmoving, a statue of resignation. His head was bowed slightly, his shoulders slumped. He looked defeated, perhaps, but he also looked complicit. We have much to discuss in the coming days, Seraphina continued, her voice soft yet vibrating with an unspoken power. The intricacies of our joint ventures will require close collaboration, my lord. Lord Alaric chuckled, a sound of satisfaction. Precisely. A common mind, a united front. They began to walk away, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished stone floor. Seraphina's hand remained on Kalen's arm, a constant, tangible connection. Alara watched them disappear around the corner, the sight burning into her memory. Kalen, her Kalen, the one who had whispered promises in the whispering glade, now walked beside another, bound by unspoken expectations and allowing himself to be touched with such ownership. The spiced wine on the tray in Alara's hands had grown cold. Her fingers locked around the silver handles, her knuckles white. She felt a cold knot forming deep in her stomach, tightening with every beat of her aching heart. It was a knot of despair, of betrayal, and of a fear so profound it stole her breath. The vision of Seraphina's elegant hand resting possessively on Kalen's arm would haunt her dreams. The elegant hand of Lady Seraphina Vance had rested on Kalen's arm, a possessive, subtle gesture that had sealed Alara's fate. That touch had traveled like a chill through the shadowed corners where Alara stood hidden, settling deep within her bones. The air in the corridor, usually a familiar blend of old wood and beeswax, now tasted like ash in her mouth. She could still see Seraphina's profile, sharp and calculating, a stark contrast to Kalen's weary acceptance. Her heart had hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of dread echoing the cold knot forming in her stomach. Days bled into a gray, featureless blur, each sunrise bringing no solace. Alara moved through her duties like a wraith, her footsteps silent, her gaze fixed on the polished stone floors. The grand halls of Thorn Keep, once filled with the faint memory of Kalen's laughter, now felt like a mausoleum. A constant ache resided in her chest, a silent lament for a love that had promised eternity but crumbled under the weight of duty. She ate little, the rich familiar flavors of the Keep's kitchens turning to dust in her mouth. Sleep offered no true escape, only restless dreams of sun-dappled glades and whispered vows. Then, one quiet afternoon as Alara knelt by the hearth in a deserted servant's antechamber, tending a dying fire, it happened. A flutter deep within her, distinct from the usual pangs of hunger or anxiety. It was a gentle stir, then a definite, undeniable thrum. A life. Her hand flew to her belly, fingers pressing lightly against the rough fabric of her apron. Another movement, stronger this time, a tiny, insistent declaration of existence. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound caught between terror and a burgeoning, fierce joy. Tears, hot and sudden, streamed down her cheeks, soaking into the collar of her worn dress. This was not the trembling fear she had known before, but a different kind of tremor, one that resonated with the very core of her being. She tasted the salt of her tears, a stark reminder of her solitude. The small room, usually a place of quiet chores, now felt charged with an intimate, secret energy. This small, insistent being within her was real, undeniable. It was the only pure thing left to her, a fragile beacon in the encroaching darkness. A powerful surge of protectiveness, primal and all-consuming, washed over her. This tiny kick was a promise, a burden, and a revolutionary spark all at once. She was no longer just Alara, the forgotten servant girl. She was a vessel, a protector, a mother. The world shifted on its axis in that silent, firelit room. The protectiveness solidified into a desperate resolve. She needed to know, once and for all, she needed to hear it from him, even if the words would break her completely. She clung to a sliver of hope, a desperate, foolish thought that perhaps, just perhaps, the Kalen she knew still existed, buried beneath the weight of his father's demands. She found Kalen in the Keep's smaller library, a room rarely frequented, lined with dusty tomes and the scent of aged parchment. He stood by a tall window, his back to her, silhouetted against the pale afternoon light. His shoulders seemed heavier, his posture stiff. The familiar sight of his dark, unruly hair, once a source of comfort, now pierced her with a fresh wave of grief. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of old paper and something metallic, like sorrow. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread woven into the quiet of the room. He turned slowly, his blue eyes, once so full of warmth for her, now appeared distant, almost glazed. They flickered to her, then quickly away, settling on the window pane as if trying to find an escape. He looked tired, older than his 23 years. A faint shadow lay beneath his eyes, and the corners of his mouth were pulled down in a perpetual line of resignation. "Elara," he replied, his voice flat, devoid of its usual gentle inflection. The sound was like a dull, heavy stone dropping into a deep well. She stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to still their tremble. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his skin, a ghost of their shared intimacy. It tore at her. "The baby," she began, her vocals cracking. "I felt it today. A kick." She waited, searching his face for any flicker of the Kalen she knew, any sign of shared wonder or joy. His jaw tightened. He did not meet her gaze. He simply stared out the window, his fingers clenching and unclenching at his sides. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow. "Kalen, please," she pleaded, her voice a raw whisper. "This is our child. Our child. What will happen to us? To them?" She reached out, her hand hovering uncertainly, wanting to touch him, to feel the familiar warmth of his skin, but she hesitated. There was an invisible barrier between them, cold and impenetrable. He finally turned his head, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. They held a profound, heartbreaking weariness, but no warmth, no love, only a desperate, haunted emptiness. "Elara, you know it is not possible," he said, his voice low, strained, as if each word caused him physical pain. "My father, the clan needs this alliance. There is no other way." His words, once promises of devotion, were now cold pronouncements of defeat. She saw the truth starkly in his eyes. He was gone. The man who had pledged his heart to her in the whispering glade, the one who had gifted her the silver locket, had vanished. In his place stood a stranger, bound by duties and fears she could not penetrate. The scent of dust and old books seemed to press in on her, heavy and oppressive. "But what about our child?" she pressed, a final desperate plea, her voice barely a breath. "Did our love mean nothing? Do I mean nothing?" A fresh wave of tears blurred her vision, but she fought them back, refusing to break completely in front of this distant shadow of a man. He closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle twitching in his cheek. When he opened them, the weariness had hardened into a cold resolve. "I cannot," he stated, his voice flat, final. "I cannot risk the clan. I cannot risk my father's wrath. You must understand." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, a mechanical offering. "I will ensure you are provided for. You and the child." The words hung in the air, hollow and insulting, a gesture of charity rather than love. The small locket Kalen had given her, nestled beneath her dress, suddenly felt like a heavy leaden weight against her skin. It was no longer a symbol of love, but a cruel reminder of shattered dreams. His offer, his cold, detached promise of provision, twisted like a knife in her gut. He was offering her alms, not love, not protection, not a future. He was dismissing her, and more painfully, dismissing their child, as a problem to be managed. Elara stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time since Serafina's arrival. He was not trapped, he was complicit. He had made his choice. His loyalty, his duty, his very being, now belonged to his clan, to his father, to Serafina Vance. The Kalen she had loved, the Kalen who had vowed eternal devotion, was irrevocably lost. The air in the library, once holding the promise of comfort and shared secrets, now felt thin, impossible to breathe. A profound, chilling realization settled over her, cold as the marble floors of the keep. She was truly alone. There would be no rescue, no reprieve, no last-minute change of heart. The weight of her secret, the precious life stirring within her, rested solely on her shoulders. Her love for Kalen, once an anchor, now felt like a broken chain dragging her down. The pain was immense, a searing wound in her soul, but through it, a new strength began to pulse, steady and fierce. She turned from him without another word, her heart heavy, yet hardening with every silent step. The scent of old books in his distant presence faded behind her. The keep, once a place of stolen moments and secret joy, was now a cage, cold and hostile. She would not mourn him any longer. She could not afford to. Her focus shifted entirely, narrowed to a single burning point, the small, kicking life within her. That life, her child, was all that mattered. Alara clutched her belly, a fierce protectiveness rising within her as she understood Kalen had already made his choice, and it was not her, but duty. A feverish energy swept through Thorn Keep, a stark contrast to the quiet despair that had settled in Alara's heart. Servants moved with a frantic haste, their footsteps echoing on polished stone floors, their whispers a constant hum. Every corridor buzzed with activity, each room transformed in preparation for the grand event. Alara found herself caught in the whirlwind, her small frame weaving through the chaos, her hands aching from endless tasks. She polished silver goblets until her reflection stared back at her, distorted and pale. The clinking of cutlery, the rustle of fine silks, the distant thud of carpenters hanging new tapestries all blended into a relentless symphony of anticipation. Fresh garlands of white roses and ivy, smelling faintly of damp earth and delicate perfume, were draped over every archway. The air grew heavy with the scent of beeswax and the sweet, cloying aroma of exotic dishes being prepared in the kitchens. Alara remembered the days when such preparations filled her with a simple, childlike wonder. But now each detail felt like a shard of glass in her spirit. She watched Kalen from afar, catching glimpses of him as he moved through the bustling halls. He seemed a stranger, clad in robes of deep blue and silver, his face a mask of practiced indifference. His laugh, once so free and warm, now sounded hollow, a polite social gesture for the visiting dignitaries. Serafina by his side was a vision of cool elegance. Her movements were precise, her smiles reserved, yet Alara felt the weight of her calculating gaze across crowded rooms. The very air around Serafina seemed to hum with an ambition Alara could almost taste, a bitter metallic tang on her tongue. The days leading to the announcement stretched into an eternity for Alara, each dawn bringing her closer to the inevitable. Her baby stirred within her, a gentle flutter that was both a comfort and a sharp reminder of her precarious secret. She pressed a hand to her belly, a silent promise to the life growing there. This child, her child, was her only truth now, the one thing Kalen's choices could not touch. On the appointed evening, the grand hall shimmered under the light of hundreds of candles. The flames danced, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to mock Alara's hidden sorrow. She stood near a massive oak pillar, serving wine to an endless stream of noble guests, her gaze sweeping over the opulent scene. The hall, usually a place of solemn meals, now teemed with laughter and vibrant chatter. Ladies in shimmering gowns, gentlemen in embroidered tunics, all drank and conversed, their voices rising and falling like a restless tide. Alara felt invisible, a phantom moving among the living, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Then a hush fell over the assembly. A deep, resonant silence spread outwards from the raised dais at the far end of the hall. Lord Alaric Thorn, Kalen's father, stepped forward. His imposing figure, clad in the ceremonial colors of the Thorn clan, commanded instant attention. His silver hair caught the candlelight, making him appear almost ethereal, yet his eyes held the unyielding steel Alara knew so well. "My esteemed guests," Lord Alaric's voice boomed, rich and unwavering, filling every corner of the vast hall. "We gather this evening to mark a most auspicious occasion for the Thorn clan." His gaze swept over the expectant faces, pausing briefly on Kalen and Serafina, who stood a little behind him. Kalen's posture was stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Serafina, however, met Lord Alaric's gaze with a subtle, knowing smile, her head held high. "It is with immense pride and joy," Lord Alaric continued, his voice swelling with practiced gravitas, "that I announce the betrothal of my son, Lord Kalen Thorn, to the illustrious Lady Serafina Vance." The words, though expected, struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. The air seemed to leave her lungs, leaving her gasping in the sudden, suffocating silence. Her fingers locked around the heavy silver tray she carried, her knuckles turning white. She knew if she let go, she'd spill the contents, shattering the illusion of her composure. A tremor ran through her, starting in her hands and shaking her whole body. She felt a sudden lightness in her head, the world tilting slightly on its axis. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled nobility, quickly followed by a thunderous wave of applause. Cheers erupted, echoing off the high-vaulted ceilings, a deafening cacophony that assaulted Alara's ears. The guests surged forward, offering congratulations, their faces alight with genuine excitement. To them, this was a moment of celebration, a merging of powerful houses, a secure future. To Alara, it was the sound of her world collapsing. She watched, her vision blurred by an unshed flood of tears, as Kaelin and Seraphina stepped forward. Seraphina's hand rested lightly, possessively, on Kaelin's arm. Her smile was wider now, a brilliant, triumphant display that seemed to radiate pure satisfaction. Kaelin offered a polite nod, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. But his eyes, when he finally lifted them, held a depth of sorrow that Alara recognized instantly. It was a fleeting glimpse, a flicker of the Kaelin she once knew, before his mask of duty settled firmly back into place. The cheers intensified, a joyous roar that filled the hall. Alara felt a searing pain in her chest, a physical ache that tightened around her heart. Each congratulatory shout, each peal of laughter, felt like a fresh stab. She wanted to scream, to shatter the festive facade, to run from the suffocating weight of it all. But she was a servant, invisible, bound by her station to witness her own undoing. She found herself retreating, drawn by an instinct for self-preservation, a desperate need to escape the unbearable noise and light. Her legs felt heavy, each step a monumental effort. She ducked behind a heavy tapestry, its rich fabric smelling of dust and age, that concealed a small servant's alcove. The muffled sounds of celebration still reached her, but here, in the shadows, she could breathe. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her hand instinctively going to her belly, a silent prayer forming on her lips. The cheers continued, a relentless, jubilant declaration of a future that held no place for her. To the gathered crowd, those sounds were a symphony of hope and prosperity. But to Alara, huddled in the forgotten alcove, they were the crushing, undeniable death knell of every hope, every dream, every fragile piece of her heart she had given to Kaelin. A feverish energy swept through Thorn Keep, a stark contrast to the quiet despair that had settled in Alara's heart. Servants moved with a frantic haste, their footsteps echoing on polished stone floors, their whispers a constant hum. Every corridor buzzed with activity, each room transformed in preparation for the grand event. Alara found herself caught in the whirlwind, her small frame weaving through the chaos, her hands aching from endless tasks. She polished silver goblets until her reflection stared back at her, distorted and pale. The clinking of cutlery, the rustle of fine silks, the distant thud of carpenters hanging new tapestries all blended into a relentless symphony of anticipation. Fresh garlands of white roses and ivy, smelling faintly of damp earth and delicate perfume, were draped over every archway. The air grew heavy with the scent of beeswax and the sweet, cloying aroma of exotic dishes being prepared in the kitchens. Alara remembered the days when such preparations filled her with a simple, childlike wonder. But now each detail felt like a shard of glass in her spirit. She watched Kaelin from afar, catching glimpses of him as he moved through the bustling halls. He seemed a stranger, clad in robes of deep blue and silver, his face a mask of practiced indifference. His laugh, once so free and warm, now sounded hollow, a polite social gesture for the visiting dignitaries. Seraphina, by his side, was a vision of cool elegance. Her movements were precise, her smiles reserved, yet Alara felt the weight of her calculating gaze across crowded rooms. The very air around Seraphina seemed to hum with an ambition Alara could almost taste, a bitter metallic tang on her tongue. The days leading to the announcement stretched into an eternity for Alara, each dawn bringing her closer to the inevitable. Her baby stirred within her, a gentle flutter that was both a comfort and a sharp reminder of her precarious secret. She pressed a hand to her belly, a silent promise to the life growing there. This child, her child, was her only truth now, the one thing Kaelin's choices could not touch. On the appointed evening, the grand hall shimmered under the light of hundreds of candles. The flames danced, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to mock Ilara's hidden sorrow. She stood near a massive oak pillar, serving wine to an endless stream of noble guests, her gaze sweeping over the opulent scene. The hall, usually a place of solemn meals, now teemed with laughter and vibrant chatter. Ladies in shimmering gowns, gentlemen in embroidered tunics, all drank and conversed, their voices rising and falling like a restless tide. Alara felt invisible, a phantom moving among the living, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Then a hush fell over the assembly. A deep, resonant silence spread outwards from the raised dais at the far end of the hall. Lord Alaric Thorne, Kaelin's father, stepped forward. His imposing figure, clad in the ceremonial colors of the Thorne clan, commanded instant attention. His silver hair caught the candlelight, making him appear almost ethereal, yet his eyes held the unyielding steel Alara knew so well. "My esteemed guests," Lord Alaric's voice boomed, rich and unwavering, filling every corner of the vast hall. "We gather this evening to mark a most auspicious occasion for the Thorne clan." His gaze swept over the expectant faces, pausing briefly on Kaelin, Mayern, and Seraphina, who stood a little behind him. Kaelin's posture was stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Seraphina, however, met Lord Alaric's gaze with a subtle, knowing smile, her head held high. "It is with immense pride and joy," Lord Alaric continued, his voice swelling with practiced gravitas, "that I announce the betrothal of my son, Lord Kaelin Thorne, to the illustrious Lady Seraphina Vance." The words, though expected, struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. The air seemed to leave her lungs, leaving her gasping in the sudden, suffocating silence. Her fingers locked around the heavy silver tray she carried, her knuckles turning white. She knew if she let go, she'd spill the contents, shattering the illusion of her composure. A tremor ran through her, starting in her hands and shaking her whole body. She felt the sudden lightness in her head, the world tilting slightly on its axis. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled nobility, quickly followed by a thunderous wave of applause. Cheers erupted, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings, a deafening cacophony that assaulted Alara's ears. The guests surged forward, offering congratulations, their faces alight with genuine excitement. To them, this was a moment of celebration, a merging of powerful houses, a secure future. To Alara, it was the sound of her world collapsing. She watched, her vision blurred by an unshed flood of tears, as Kaelin and Seraphina stepped forward. Seraphina's hand rested lightly, possessively on Kaelin's arm. Her smile was wider now, a brilliant, triumphant display that seemed to radiate pure satisfaction. Kaelin offered a polite nod, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. But his eyes, when he finally lifted them, held a depth of sorrow that Alara recognized instantly. It was a fleeting glimpse, a flicker of the Kaelin she once knew, before his mask of duty settled firmly back into place. The cheers intensified, a joyous roar that filled the hall. Alara felt a searing pain in her chest, a physical ache that tightened around her heart. Each congratulatory shout, each peal of laughter, felt like a fresh stab. She wanted to scream, to shatter the festive facade, to run from the suffocating weight of it all. But she was a servant, invisible, bound by her station to witness her own undoing. She found herself retreating, drawn by an instinct for self-preservation, a desperate need to escape the unbearable noise and light. Her legs felt heavy, each step a monumental effort. She ducked behind a heavy tapestry, its rich fabric smelling of dust and age, that concealed a small servant's alcove. The muffled sounds of celebration still reached her, but here, in the shadows, she could breathe. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her hand instinctively going to her belly, a silent prayer forming on her lips. The cheers continued, a relentless, jubilant declaration of a future that held no place for her. To the gathered crowd, those sounds were a symphony of hope and prosperity. But to Alara, huddled in the forgotten alcove, they were the crushing, undeniable death knell of every hope, every dream, every fragile piece of her heart she had given to Kaelin. The grand hall of Thorne Keep shimmered with deceptive joy. 1,000 candles cast shadows across tapestries. Silks of emerald and sapphire draped from the rafters, woven with white roses and crimson lilies. Their sweet, heavy scent clung to the air, Golden light from chandeliers gleamed on every surface. It made ancient stone walls feel soft. This spectacle hid the hard realities sustaining such power. Alara moved through the throng, a silent ghost in her gray servant's dress. A tray of crystal goblets balanced in her trembling hands, its weight pressed into her palms, a small burden against the crushing, invisible one in her heart. She heard a ceaseless murmur of voices, laughter, and congratulations. It was not actual words, only an oppressive hum. Clinking glasses, rustling fabrics, a faint lute strain all created an overwhelming unreality. Her breath hitched with each step. She tried to maintain composure, to blend as she was trained. Tonight, blending was impossible. Her body felt alien, a vessel holding a dangerous secret. It seemed to radiate heat beneath her worn linen. She felt every curious glance, every brush of silk, as if they knew, as if they saw the subtle curve of her belly growing more pronounced each day. Her eyes, despite her efforts, kept rising to the dais. There, in brighter golden light, stood Kalen and Seraphina. He wore the formal dark velvet of his clan, silver embroidery catching the light. He seemed more distant, more a part of the spectacle than the man she knew. His dark hair was styled, his posture rigid, a noble prince on display. Beside him, Seraphina Vance was cool elegance in a gown like winter moonlight, shimmering with tiny pearls. Her dark hair was coiffed, her expression composed, almost regal. Ilara felt a bitter sting behind her eyes, a burning that threatened to spill. She blinked it back, focusing on her feet, steadying the tray. Each face was a blur of painted smiles and glittering jewels. Their joy contrasted with the hollow ache in her chest. She wondered if they knew this celebration's true cost, the quiet devastation it brought. Did they sense the broken promises and shattered dreams beneath the polished surface? Nausea washed over her, a reminder of the life within. She paused, feigning interest in an empty goblet, willing the sensation to pass. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Cold silver bit into her skin, grounding her. She imagined the tiny flutter inside, a fragile butterfly wing, a secret pulse, hers alone. It was defiance, a quiet rebellion against the world unfolding before her. She watched Kalen nod to a lord. His lips curved into a practiced, empty smile. Detachment was in his eyes, a shadow she recognized from their last painful encounter. It was the look of a man trapped, resigned to his fate. Yet it offered Alara no comfort. His resignation was her ruin. She remembered the fire in his gaze when he confessed his love. She remembered his touch as he placed the locket around her neck. Where was that man now? Had he been swallowed by clan demands, or was he never as real as she believed? Seraphina moved with effortless grace, her hands clasped, occasionally gesturing with a jeweled finger. Her eyes scanned the room with calculating intelligence, missing nothing. A subtle possessiveness showed as Seraphina leaned closer to Kalen. A whisper exchanged, a private moment designed to exclude. Alara imagined Seraphina's silk brushing Kalen's velvet, their shoulders close. A cold dread settled around her heart. Thomas, a senior servant, nudged her forward. "Keep moving, Alara. The guests are thirsty." His voice was low, his face weary. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her lips were too dry for a reply. She resented his interruption. It pulled her from her silent vigil, from the painful comfort of watching the man who promised her the world. She poured wine for a jovial lady. Her hand shook so slightly only she would notice. Ruby liquid swirled in the crystal, a symbol of festivities. The lady chattered about flowers and the beautiful match. Her voice was a superficial drone, grating on Alara's raw nerves. Each word of praise for the union was a fresh wound, twisting the knife deeper. Ilara longed for her small, quiet servant's room, for darkness from this false joy. She could not leave. She was bound to her duties, a cog in the keep's machinery. She was forced to witness her own undoing. Every corner held a memory, a phantom echo of Kalen's laughter, the warmth of his hand, their secret glances. The air, thick with roses and perfumes, felt heavy with what was lost. She almost heard his cloak rustle as he met her, his urgent whispers beneath the moonlight. Now he stood on a pedestal, elevated and untouchable. He was a stranger in the finery of his station. The gap between them felt wider than the hall, a chasm. She remembered his words, spoken with conviction, that he would find a way. He promised to protect her. They were empty words, fragile whispers carried by the wind, leaving her exposed and alone. Her fingers brushed the silver locket hidden beneath her dress, deep in her apron pocket. It was a constant companion, comfort in pain. Its weight against her skin reminded her of a love that was, a tangible piece of a past, now a cruel dream. Did he ever think of it? Did he remember giving it to her, the tender words? Or had his heart hardened, his memory erased by duty's cold steel? Clara, a servant girl, bumped her, apologizing. Alara offered a strained smile. Her gaze drifted back to the dais. She could not look away. Pain sharpened, twisting in her gut. She needed to see it, to witness his final betrayal. Only then, perhaps, could she believe the man she loved was gone, replaced by this unfeeling lord. She saw a fleeting exchange between Kaelin and his father, Lord Alaric Thorne. A stern glance from the older man, a slight tightening of Kaelin's jaw. It was a silent conversation, a reminder of unseen chains, yet it did not lessen Alara's sorrow. His captivity was her own. Her love, once light and hope, had become a suffocating blanket. The hall chatter quieted. Anticipation rippled through the guests. A hush fell, broken by a distant, solemn trumpet. It was time. The ceremony was about to begin. Alara felt a cold sweat prickle her skin. Her breath caught. Her vision blurred for a moment. Shimmering lights merged into one overwhelming glow. She had to focus, to be strong for the tiny heartbeat she carried. She gripped the empty tray tighter, her knuckles white. Her heart beat an erratic rhythm, echoing the tiny life within. A shared pulse of fear and defiance. The air grew thick, heavy. The scent of lilies, unspoken promises about to be made. Kaelin turned slightly, his profile to her. His gaze fixed straight ahead, utterly impassive. Seraphina stood beside him, her head held high. A faint smirk played on her lips. The air grew thick with a perfumed silence as the murmuring crowd hushed. Alara pressed into the narrow alcove, felt the stone wall cold against her back, a stark contrast to the burning in her chest. Her breath hitched, catching somewhere between her ribs and the growing swell of her stomach. Through a gap in the heavy tapestry, she saw them, moving like figures in a dream, yet brutally real. Kaelin and Seraphina advanced towards the raised dais, a path strewn with white rose petals that crunched softly under their expensive shoes. The light from 1,000 beeswax candles painted their forms in shades of gold and amber. Alara's eyes, burning without tears yet, were fixed on Kaelin. He wore the formal thorn colors, deep forest green and silver, tailored to perfection. His dark hair, usually falling boyishly across his forehead, was brushed back, revealing the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. He looked every inch the clan leader's son, distant and untouchable. Seraphina moved beside him, a vision in ivory silk and lace, her head held high. A circlet of pearls nestled in her dark hair, glinting like captured moonlight. Her posture was impeccable, every movement a testament to years of rigorous training. Alara noticed the almost imperceptible sway of Seraphina's hips, a quiet confidence that Alara herself had never possessed. A faint, sweet scent, perhaps orange blossom or jasmine, drifted from the dais, mixing with the heavier aroma of wilting lilies Alara could not see. Alara's fingers, raw from endless scrubbing and cold from the damp keep air, clenched around the rough fabric of her worn dress. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She tried to slow her breathing, to tell herself this was merely another formal gathering, but the sheer weight of the moment, the expectant hush from the assembled guests, belied the lie. Every noble in the region seemed to be present, their eyes glittering with anticipation, their whispers a low hum that vibrated through the very floorboards. They reached the altar, a grand structure of polished oak and gilded silver, adorned with more flowers. A robed elder, his face lined with generations of wisdom, stood waiting, a heavy tome open before him. Kaelin turned to face Seraphina, and Alara saw his profile. There was no joy, no tenderness in his gaze, but neither was there outright misery. His expression was carefully neutral, a mask perfectly sculpted for the occasion. This absence of feeling, this calculated composure, twisted a knife in Alara's gut more sharply than any outright despair would have. Serafina smiled then, a small, subtle upturn of her lips that did not quite reach her eyes. It was a private, triumphant gesture, meant for herself and perhaps for Kaelin. But Alara caught it. It spoke of victory, of a game well played and won. The air in the alcove seemed to press in on Alara, thick and suffocating. She tasted the metallic tang of fear, a familiar flavor now. The elder began to speak, his voice a sonorous rumble that filled the vast hall. He spoke of duty, of alliance, of the joining of two great houses for prosperity and peace. The words were ancient, steeped in tradition, echoing through the lofty ceilings. Alara heard none of it. Not really. Her world had narrowed to the two figures at the altar, bathed in that cruel golden glow. Her focus was on Kaelin's hands. He lifted his right hand, reaching for Serafina's left. Alara's breath caught again. She remembered his hands, strong and gentle, tracing patterns on her skin in the hushed intimacy of the whispering glade. She remembered the way they had clasped hers, offering comfort in unspoken promises. The memory was a fresh wound, bleeding anew. Now Kaelin's fingers closed around Serafina's, his touch firm and steady. Alara saw a glint of silver as he retrieved a ring from the elder's velvet cushion. It was a masterpiece, surely, encrusted with jewels, catching the candlelight. She imagined the cold weight of it on Serafina's finger, a symbol of everything Alara had lost. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, Kaelin slid the engagement ring onto Serafina's finger. His hand did not tremble. His gaze did not waver. There was no flicker of hesitation, no visible sign of the conflict he had once claimed tormented him. He performed the act with the practiced grace of a lord fulfilling his duty. Nothing more, nothing less. Alara had desperately searched for a sign, a quick glance in her direction, a slight hesitation, anything to prove that the man she loved still existed beneath the polished facade. There was nothing, just empty, resolute calm. A collective sigh, barely audible, rippled through the assembled guests. The deal was sealed. The alliance was forged. Alara felt a wave of nausea, her stomach lurching with a feeling far deeper than morning sickness. It was the sickening realization of a dream utterly, irrevocably shattered. The scent of those lilies, now cloying and heavy, seemed to fill her lungs, making it hard to breathe. Then Kaelin spoke, his voice clear and resonant, carried easily through the hushed hall. "Ina Kaelin Thorne," he began, his tone unwavering, "do take you, Serafina Vance, to be my lawfully wedded betrothed." Each word struck Alara like a physical blow. The clarity of his voice, the conviction with which he spoke, left no room for doubt. This was not a man coerced. This was a man making a choice. Her mind raced back to the whispering glade, to the whispered vows of eternal devotion, to the silver locket now hidden beneath her dress, pressing against her skin like a brand. Those promises, spoken with such passion, now seemed like cruel jests. He continued, "I pledge my loyalty, my honor, and my life to you, and to the union of our houses, before these witnesses and before the Maz." The finality in his tone, the solemnity of his oath, echoed in Alara's ears. This was the moment. This was the true agonizing end. Her hope, fragile and stubborn, finally crumbled into dust. It was not just a political arrangement. It was a complete surrender, a public declaration of his allegiance to Serafina and all she represented. Serafina's subtle smile widened just a fraction, a brief flash of pure, unadulterated triumph that she quickly suppressed. Her eyes met Kaelin's for a fleeting second, a silent communion that spoke volumes Alara did not want to understand. Alara watched, helpless, as the woman who had stolen Kaelin's future, and by extension hers, absorbed his vow, claiming it as her own. The grand hall, filled with its shimmering lights and elegant guests, suddenly seemed to spin around Alara. The gilded decorations blurred into an indistinct haze. A cold dread spread through Alara's limbs, turning her blood to ice. Her vision swam, the candlelight appearing as distorted streaks against the darkness. The air, once thick with perfume, now felt thin, almost non-existent. A profound, aching sorrow welled up within her, threatening to consume her entirely. It was a sorrow so vast, so heavy. It felt as though the very stones of Thorn Keep wept with her. Her mind screamed, a wordless, agonizing cry that tore through her soul but made no sound in the opulent hall. Her body trembled uncontrollably, a violent shiver racking her frame. Though the air was warm, her eyes, open and unblinking, stared at the tableau before her. Kalen, now irrevocably bound, his back to her, facing his future with Seraphina. Her future, the life she had dreamed of, had just been erased. As Kalen pledged his life and loyalty to Seraphina, Ilara's world shattered into a million pieces. A silent scream trapped in her throat as her hand instinctively went to her swollen belly. A silent scream tore through Ilara's soul, a soundless rupture in the fabric of her world. The grand hall faded, the celebratory cheers became a distant hum, and all that remained was the crushing weight of Kalen's clear, unwavering voice pledging his life to another. Her hand flew to her belly, a fierce, protective instinct, overriding the agony of her broken heart. There was no room for weeping now, only escape. She moved like a shadow, the crimson tapestry a fleeting memory behind her. Her feet, usually light and nimble from years of service, felt heavy and leaden, yet she forced them to move. The scent of roasted meats and sweet wine from the ceremony still clung to the air, a cruel reminder of the life she was leaving behind. Each whispered step down the servant's passage echoed the urgency in her chest. She had to flee before the dawn, before they discovered her secret, before the full weight of Kalen's betrayal crushed her entirely. Her small chamber, usually a sanctuary of sorts, now felt like a cage. She moved with a desperate efficiency, her fingers fumbling with the ties of a worn satchel. What did one take when abandoning an entire life? She grabbed the thick, homespun cloak she wore for market trips, its dark color a promise of concealment. A small pouch of coins, a meager sum saved over years, felt like a fortune in her trembling hand. A dried hunk of bread from the kitchen, a water skin she filled from the communal tap, its cool touch a small comfort. Her eyes fell upon the silver locket, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Its cool metal felt alien against her skin now, a relic of a love that had never truly existed. The thorny rose, the oak leaf, symbols of a bond now severed. She almost left it, a bitter taste rising in her throat, but a stubborn part of her, a part clinging to the ghost of what was, tucked it deep into the satchel. It was a reminder, she told herself, a warning against future blindness. The faint scent of dust and old wood filled the small room, a temporary home that no longer offered refuge. The castle was a labyrinth of shadows and murmurs in the deepest hours of night. Sleepy guards changed posts with low grunts, their footsteps heavy on the stone. Ilara pressed herself against cold walls, her breath catching in her throat with each approaching sound. The chill of the night air seeped through her thin clothes, but the fear within her was colder still. She could hear the distant strains of music from the great hall, the fading laughter of the last revelers, each note a nail hammered into her heart. Her belly, a subtle curve beneath her dress, felt vulnerable, exposed. She knew the castle's hidden roots, the forgotten stairwells, the seldom-used service gates. Years of scrubbing floors and polishing silver had taught her every secret passage. The rough stone walls scraped her outstretched hand as she felt her way through the inky blackness of a seldom-used tunnel, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and ancient stone. A mouse skittered across her path, making her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. She paused, listening intently, convinced her frantic pulse must be audible to anyone nearby. But only the distant, mournful hoot of an owl answered. Finally, she reached the outer wall, near the western stables, where a small, rarely locked postern gate offered a chance at freedom. The heavy iron felt cold beneath her fingers, its rusty groan as she carefully pushed it open, sounding like thunder in the silent night. A sliver of moonlight illuminated the dew-kissed grass beyond. She slipped through, pulling the gate shut behind her with a soft click that echoed in her ears. The world outside the keep was vast, dark, and terrifyingly free. The scent of pine and damp soil filled her lungs, sharper and wilder than the stale air of the castle. Her legs ached instantly as she began to walk, away from the formidable silhouette of Thorn Keep. The cobbled path turned quickly to a dirt track, then a barely discernible deer trail through the ancient woods. The trees loomed over her like silent, judging giants, their branches intertwining to block out the sparse moonlight. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig beneath her foot, sent a jolt of panic through her. She imagined Kalen's men, torches blazing, hounds baying, already on her trail. The baby inside her stirred, a gentle flutter that reminded her of her sacred purpose. She was no longer just running for herself. Hours blurred into an endless trek. Her lungs burned with the effort. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed onward. The thick undergrowth scratched at her bare arms, leaving thin, stinging lines. Thorns tore at her cloak, catching on her hair. She stumbled over roots, her ankles twisting with each misstep. But she refused to fall. The cold, damp earth seeped through her thin shoes, chilling her to the bone. She yearned for warmth, for sleep, for the safety of a bed, but there was no turning back. The memory of Kalen's face, so impassive as he placed the ring on Seraphina's finger, was a constant, sharp pain in her mind. It fueled her, a bitter wellspring of resolve. How could he? How could he betray every whispered promise, every stolen kiss in the whispering glade, every tender touch? The image of Seraphina's triumphant, subtle smile, a predator claiming her prize, made Alara clench her jaw. She had been a fool, a naive servant girl, caught in the machinations of a world far grander and crueler than she could have ever imagined. She focused on the immediate, the tangible, the uneven ground beneath her feet, the cool night air on her face, the faint scent of decaying leaves. Her fingers, numb with cold, clutched the small satchel against her chest. The locket, hidden within, felt heavy, a burden rather than a comfort. She tried to dismiss Kalen from her thoughts, to banish his image, but it was impossible. He was woven into the very fabric of her being, and now into the life she carried. A child born of a love that was now a lie. The moon, once high and full, began its slow descent, casting longer, distorted shadows. Ilara's vision blurred with exhaustion. Each breath was a struggle, each step a monumental effort. Her belly, once a source of quiet joy, now felt like a heavy stone pulling her down. She paused, leaning against the rough bark of a massive oak, its ancient presence a silent witness to her despair. Her legs threatened to buckle, her eyelids drooped, but she forced them open. There was no rest yet, not until she was truly safe. She pressed on, driven by a primal fear and a nascent hope. The forest began to thin, giving way to rolling hills and open fields, the faint promise of a distant road. The air grew colder, the wind more biting as it swept across the open land. She longed for the concealment of the trees, but she knew she needed to reach a clearer path, a way to put more distance between herself and the keep. The faint chirping of crickets, the rustle of dry grasses, were the only sounds accompanying her desperate flight. Her mind replayed Kalen's promises, his assurances that he would find a way, that she and their child would be safe. Empty words, swallowed by the demands of his clan, by the ambition of his father. He had chosen duty over love, power over heart, and in doing so he had shattered her world. The betrayal felt like a fresh wound, bleeding anew with every labored step. But beneath the pain, a steel resolve began to form, cold and sharp. She would not let his choices destroy her, or their child. She would survive. The sky in the east began to lighten, a pale gray spreading slowly across the horizon. Dawn was approaching, bringing with it the terrifying possibility of discovery. Her body screamed for respite. Her feet were raw, her head throbbed, and a deep ache settled in her lower back. She stumbled, catching herself on a low bush, its thorny branches tearing at her cloak. A sob caught in her throat, quickly stifled. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow but of sheer, overwhelming exhaustion. The baby within her kicked, a soft, insistent flutter, as if urging her on. She reached a narrow, winding dirt road, barely more than a cart track. It offered no concealment, but it was a path, a direction. Her vision swam, the world tilting precariously. Her legs finally gave way, collapsing beneath her with a soft thud. She lay there, sprawled on the cold, damp earth, her satchel still clutched to her chest. The first rays of the rising sun painted the distant sky in hues of soft pink and orange. casting long, ethereal shadows across the silent landscape. Alara's chest heaved, each breath shallow and painful. The image of Kaelin and Seraphina's intertwined hands, glowing in the golden light of the ceremony, burned behind her eyelids, a cruel, indelible mark. It was a searing pain, yet it also kindled a new fierce heat within her, a desperate strength to rise again. The journey had worn her spirit thin. Exhausted and alone, Alara collapsed by a dirt road at dawn. Kaelin and Seraphina's intertwined hands burned in her mind, driving her forward. The rising sun painted the horizon, but she noticed only the ache in her legs. A precious life stirred within her, a quiet, insistent thrumming beneath her skin. Every breath became a desperate plea for survival. Her throat was raw, her lips cracked, yet defiance flickered. She would not fail this child. After what felt like forever, a distant smoke plume caught her eye. It rose gently from the ancient forest. Hope, a fragile thing, fluttered in her chest. She pushed on, her heart quickening with each slow step. The air brought the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a promise of human presence. Distant sounds of a rooster and a cowbell, a murmur of voices, hinted at life. This was a balm after Thornkeep's brutal politics. She stumbled into Oakhaven Village as the sun climbed higher. Simple homes stood, their thatched roofs weathered. Children paused their games to stare at the pale stranger. Adults watched, curious but not unkind. Alara pulled her cloak tighter, trying to hide her swelling belly. Her heart pounded with fear and desperate hope. She was here, in refuge, but could she truly belong? The first days blurred with caution. Alara kept to the village edges, gathering food. Her eyes scanned constantly for danger, for any sign of recognition. She slept beneath ancient trees, her body aching, but her spirit held. She watched the villagers, their quiet routines, their shared laughter. Their lives were tied to the land, not noble machinations. A deep yearning for that simplicity settled in her soul. One morning, a harsh, rattling cough drew her attention. It came from Martha, an old woman known for her gentle demeanor. Martha sat outside her cottage, hunched and struggling for breath. Alara hesitated, remembering her mother's lessons on herbs. She had learned their healing properties in the keep's garden. It was a forgotten skill, now a potential lifeline. The urge to help was stronger than her fear. "Excuse me, ma'am," Alara said softly with conviction. Martha looked up, startled, her eyes red-rimmed. "You sound unwell," Alara continued. "I know a simple remedy for such a cough." Martha studied her, seeing kindness and quiet strength. "What remedy?" Martha rasped, her voice thin with desperate hope. Alara described hyssop, mullein, and wild honey, detailing the brewing method. Martha listened intently, hope sparking in her tired eyes. The next day, Alara went into the woods. Her senses, sharpened by flight and old lessons, guided her. She gathered the plants with care, feeling a return to herself. She returned to Martha's cottage with the herbs. Villagers watched with quiet curiosity. Alara brewed the infusion over Martha's hearth. Martha drank the warm liquid, finding immediate relief. Within days, Martha's cough subsided, her breathing clearer. A ripple of gratitude spread through Oakhaven. This simple act wove Alara into their lives. Villagers began seeking Alara for her quiet wisdom. They offered her tasks, mending clothes, helping with harvest, tending animals. They shared meals and stories, slowly drawing her in. Alara felt fragile tendrils of belonging form. This acceptance felt like a lifeline, a warmth thawing the ice around her heart. She was becoming part of Oakhaven, yet she knew she needed a sanctuary for her most profound secret. Thomas, the village carpenter, approached her. "There's an old cottage," he said, gesturing towards the forest edge. "Empty for years, needs work, but it's quiet, away from prying eyes." He offered a solution, not questions. Alara's heart surged with gratitude and relief. She walked to it that afternoon. The path was overgrown, leading deeper into the woods. The cottage stood small and solitary, its walls leaning, its roof worn. Dust danced in sunlight through the grimy window. It was humble, but utterly hers. Peace settled over her as she stepped inside. She spent weeks cleaning and repairing. Her hands, once soft, grew strong from the labor. She patched the roof, mended the window, and swept away dust. She gathered moss for a bed, built a table, and constructed a hearth. The cottage, once cold, now smelled of wood smoke and pine. It felt like home. Here, shielded by trees, she felt safe. Her belly grew rounder, a constant, undeniable presence. She often sat by the fire, feeling her child move. Kaylin's betrayal would resurface, a dull ache. But her fierce love for this tiny being overshadowed it, becoming her anchor and purpose. Days shortened, winter approached. Alara knew her time was near, bringing a cold, stark fear. She was truly alone. No midwives or familiar faces offered comfort. She gathered cloths, warm water, and stoked the fire. The cottage's silence, usually a comfort, now amplified her solitude. One night the pain began. It grew steadily, consuming her. She gripped her cot, breath catching in her throat. Each wave was an agonizing reminder of life demanding its emergence. A primal scream tore from her throat, muffled by the walls. Tears streamed down her face from physical torment and crushing loneliness. She thought of Kaylin's broken promises, shattered by politics. The memory twisted her gut, a bitter sting of betrayal. Anger surged, then a fierce resolve. This child was hers. It was the only thing that mattered now. Hours blurred in agony and effort. Her body pushed, strained, fought. Her cries filled the small room. The fire mimicked her heart's frantic beat. Pain was an ocean, but her child's unseen face pulled her back. She bore down, teeth gritted, muscles screaming. Just when she thought she could not, a final, tremendous push brought blessed release. Then a sound, a cry, tiny, fragile, yet utterly powerful. Alara fell back, trembling from exhaustion. She looked down, vision blurred with tears and sweat. A tiny, squirming form lay before her, alive and perfect. It was a girl, her daughter. Her heart, once a drum of pain, now swelled with overwhelming love. She reached out, shaking, and lifted her child close, skin to skin. The newborn's warmth was an electric shock, pure affection. The tiny face turned to her, a soft, mewling sound filling the quiet room. Alara felt a rush of emotion so profound it stole her breath. This was her purpose. This tiny being was her entire world. All past pain and betrayal faded. She pressed her daughter against her chest. A new dawn broke, mirroring the hope in her heart. Alara held her newborn baby close, whispering a fierce promise to protect them, no matter the one, as a new dawn rose over the quiet village. 7 quiet years had woven Alara into Oakhaven's fabric. Her hands, once soft, now bore the marks of healing herbs. The scent of lavender and rosemary clung to her, drawing villagers to her door. She moved with quiet purpose, stirring willow bark over the hearth. Her moss-green eyes held echoes of past sorrows, yet shone with calm. She was Alara, the healer, a cornerstone of the valley. Her son, Leo, burst through the cottage door, wild berries clutched in his small fist. His bright laughter was the truest song Alara knew, chasing away shadows. Leo knew nothing of keeps or noble blood. His world was the whispering woods and his mother's embrace. Laura watched him, a slow smile gracing her lips, a fierce warmth in her chest. Leo embodied her defiance, proof of a forbidden love. She saw flickers of Kaylin in his quick gestures, in the curve of his chin. A pang sometimes caught in her throat. It was a bittersweet acknowledgement, a ghost of a memory that no longer held power to wound. Thornkeep felt like a dream from another life. Its grandeur and stifling expectations were a world away from Oakhaven's fresh air and quiet seasons. One crisp autumn afternoon, a merchant's wagon rumbled through the village. Alara, gathering feverfew, heard the distant clatter. Her senses sharpened. The wagon carried a stylized thorny rose, the Thorn Clan crest. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around her herb basket. She scooped Leo into her arms, pressing him close, her heart thrumming. She murmured reassurances, eyes tracking the wagon, and led him swiftly home. From her narrow window, she watched. The merchant spoke of trade routes and Thorn prosperity. He mentioned a lavish wedding years ago, a union that brought strength to the clan. He spoke of Lord Kaylin, now powerful, and his elegant Lady Seraphina, who had borne him a strapping son. Alara's face remained blank, her inner world a sudden whirl of old emotions. Images flashed, Kaylin, conflicted, placing the silver locket in her hand. Then Kaelin, distant, placing a ring on Seraphina's finger, pledging vows. The images, once vivid, now seemed faint. The pain, once a raw wound, was a dull ache, a scar that no longer governed her steps. She felt a strange detachment, observing a life she had escaped, not lost. She turned from the window, her gaze settling on Leo. His innocence was a tangible shield against her past. She had not merely survived, she had thrived. She had built. Her quiet strength, cultivated by challenges and lonely nights, found purpose in the humble village heart. Alara's reputation spread. People journeyed for her counsel and healing touch. Her cottage became a beacon. She learned the forest's languages, the secrets of ancient roots. She taught village children the names of herbs and compassion. Her days filled with purpose. She rose with the dawn, tending her garden of medicinal herbs. Then she saw patience, her hands steady, voice soothing, offering comfort and cure. Evenings were for Leo. They shared simple meals by the fire, his small voice recounting his day. She told him stories of nature, never of his father or the keep. Sometimes after Leo slept, Alara took out Kaelin's silver locket. Its cool metal felt familiar. She traced the thorny rose, the oak leaf, the hand-painted portrait of a younger Kaelin. The face was still handsome, but the image no longer stirred a tempest of emotions. It was a relic, a path not taken, a life she had bravely chosen to leave behind. The locket reminded her of shattered dreams, but also the strength she found in the wreckage. It was a story of survival, of a mother's fierce love. Tears had watered the seeds of her own growth, transforming grief into a deep well of empathy. Her heart, once broken, had mended with threads of resilience. It beat with a steady, quiet rhythm, a testament to the peace she had found. This peace was born not of forgetting, but of acceptance, understanding that some losses paved the way for greater gains. She had traded servitude for independence, choosing freedom and her child's future over a gilded cage. Years etched lines around her eyes, lines of wisdom, not sorrow. Streaks of silver caught the light. She possessed an enduring radiance, a soul weathered and strong. One late spring afternoon, Alara sat outside her cottage, watching Leo. He was almost 8, chasing a small dog through wildflowers. The setting sun painted the sky in orange and purple, casting long shadows. The air smelled of clover and fresh earth. Leo's laughter, pure and unburdened, resonated deep within her. He was everything she had fought for. The past was a story she carried, but it was no longer her present. Her present was this quiet village, this boundless sky, this precious, laughing child. A profound contentment settled over her, warm and true. She had found her own nobility, not through blood, but through resilience, kindness, and an unwavering heart. She had built a life of love, purpose, and profound freedom. Alara smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that reached her eyes, reflecting the fading day. Her heart swelled with a quiet, boundless warmth, watching her son, free and joyful under the wide-open sky.